Good evening to all our friends. I am Carlos Miguel Prieto, music director of the Louisiana Philharmonic. And this, which we have called our Thursday happy hour, is, I believe, the fifth one we have in 5 weeks. And we had planned to talk about, up to now, I've had interviews with different people, some founders of the orchestra, a string quartet, the whole viola section, the whole clarinet section. And this week, we've decided to go into the subject that we all have in mind this week and these weeks, and that we hopefully can talk about in a very open way. And I am joined by two friends, by two tremendously talented musicians. Courtney Bryan, who is a New Orleanian and who I met just lately through premiering her piece called Rejoice. And I have to say, Courtney, that premiere that week, the work with you and your piece really was one of the highlights of our season for many, many reasons. For musical reasons, for personal reasons, and for reasons that I believe go way beyond music, which is I found a voice. You have a unique voice, you have a unique talent, and you have a unique way to communicate, which I just absolutely adored. And I also found both in you and in your piece, Rejoice, a piece along with just a beautiful message that I just found absolutely breathtaking. And so welcome to our happy hour, Courtney, and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Carlos. That experience meant everything to me in a lot of ways too. It was such a great experience to work with the LPO because I enjoyed the LPO as a fan. I love coming to the concerts and just enjoying all the beautiful music and the orchestra. And so to write this piece for the LPO was a great experience, and also to have an orchestra piece of mine performed at home was a very big deal for me because I had members of all the different communities I've been a part of, some since I was a child. There's my family, my church community, teachers of mine, but also folks who I've met in more recent times. And it's just like all these different communities together. And also it was a chance to have a sort of a celebration piece. It was, Rejoice was the type of celebration when you've been through some hard times, but you've made it through in some way or by some divine way. And so that's what the inspiration was for the piece. So it meant a lot. And I'm really happy to be here today to talk with you both.
So one of the beautiful things about that premiere and about that week was that not only were you present at all rehearsals, but also many of your friends and church members and mentors, some of which are legends, were present in the concert, and that really meant so much to all the orchestra. So Courtney, you are not only an immensely talented composer and musician, as is attested by this Rome Prize, which you have won, which is quite a huge achievement. But you embody something that I adore about New Orleans, which is this diverse voice, and this voice that looks for inclusion and looks for communication. And in many ways, this piece Rejoice had that, because if you remember, well, you remember, you wrote it. The idioms change, and I found it to be a very meaningful piece in the sense that I've just talked about. We are also joined by Amelia Clingman, who is a very distinguished member of the Louisiana Philharmonic since 2008. She is a member of the viola section. So she already was part of one of these a couple weeks ago, exactly 2 weeks ago, where I did my first ever Zoom with more than 2 people, and had a great experience learning about the LPO viola section and about the viola, about the musicians themselves. And Amelia, whom I also call the linguist in the orchestra, because she's always the person who can translate from my incomprehensible Spanish words into English. Emilia has been, or was, and we'll talk about that, part of the diversity and inclusion task force, which is an important initiative for the LPO. I think it's an essential initiative for the LPO. And in that task force, she is joined, or was joined, by Dwight McGee, who is right now our president of the board, and who cannot be present because of a medical situation that's related to his family, but that is not related to this pandemic. So welcome, Amelia.
Hi, thanks. I'm happy to be here. That was a good introduction. I have nothing to add.
Explain to people why I call you the linguist.
Carlos is bilingual. I'm not, actually. I speak a little French. I don't speak Spanish, but he often gets close to the word he's looking for, and I can sort of triangulate. Usually, not always right away, but usually find the specific word that he's looking for.
and there's almost no time that she doesn't get it right. So over the years, if I have something that I can't translate, or a word that comes into my mind and can't translate, my face goes immediately to where Amelia is, and if she's off that week, then I'm lost. So I'd like to ask, to start off by just talking about these tremendously disturbing events. I have to say that I have 2 daughters. One is 16 and one is 14. I also have a 10-year-old son. And we are in a little village in Mexico, along with my sister and her 2 daughters, who are about the same age. And they, as well as we, have been obsessed about this. And they are completely connected on social media. They knew about the tragic event before we did, before the adults did, because of social media, which leads me to a thought which is, to me, very disturbing. And please understand that I say it with all the due respect that somebody who is not a US citizen can say it. But it's the fact that that we know about these events thanks to social media, meaning they've always been there, only now we are more than aware of them. We are hit in the face with reality. And that, to me, is what is so difficult to comprehend. How it is possible that after so much history, so much dialogue, these things still happen. And I don't know, and I don't have the answers. I only have a very heavy heart, and I have to say that both my orchestras in Mexico immediately contacted me and said, how can we react? And we reacted in Spanish in our own way, talking about the wish that what we do in music and in an orchestra can help us understand each other, connect each other, and to communicate. So for me, it's very, very important that you know how disturbed we are as a family, but that in no way, unfortunately, is this only in the United States existing. One of the big topics of discussion in Mexico over the last days, of course, in conjunction with this pandemic, is how do we recognize in our own country issues that are just as disturbing. So I just wanted to start with that and give you a chance, Courtney, just to react and to tell us anything that you want to tell us about this issue, and then Amelia I'll ask Amelia the same thing.
Well, thanks, Carlos. Yeah, I mean, I think it seems like one of the first steps is for us to be able to talk about what's happening, to talk about what's been happening. And it's very difficult because for some people, it's been a fight that they've been doing for a long time to bring awareness to the issue of police brutality and the different issues of racial violence in the US. And I think for some, as you mentioned, social media has helped bring it to the attention to a wider public, I think, in a way that can't be denied. Even if they heard the stories, they see videos of what's happening, what happens to someone like George Floyd. For the fact that what happened to George Floyd is not it's not the first time it's happened, you know, far from the first time this has happened to someone, but the fact that people are faced with seeing what happened, they can't deny it when they see it. You know, we see what happened with the police reports following, the way they say he had some pre-existing conditions, or, you know, an autopsy, or they would have these excuses. And there's things that have happened over time, but we have the video, so we know that it's not true. You know, we know that we saw this policeman kill George Floyd, and we saw the other policemen around. So it brings it to a wider public. And I guess what we've seen between maybe the past few years and now is how much more people have come together, and they have the language due to people over many years who have been writing about these issues and have been finding ways to put in words what's been happening and explain the situation. So people have more words of talking about solidarity and intersectionality, and to talk about what's happening, you know, like just like having the language to discuss. And so it's really as depressing as it is on one hand to see a president who is creating such divisiveness between Americans. It's also encouraging to see the young people and all the people who are really standing up for their rights and standing up for one another right now. So so it's very heartening. I have many friends who are brave and who are putting their body on the line to protest during this time. For me, the way I've been dealing with this issue, the police brutality issue, is one that's very important to me and in my music as well. So so while I haven't been so much on the ground, one thing I've been doing is writing music that deals with this issue. And part of it is bringing awareness, and part of it is me also processing my own emotions about these issues. In 2015, I wrote a piece called Sanctum for the American Composers Orchestra, and it was for orchestra and for recorded sound. And that was the first piece that I did that had a theme that was particularly police brutality. And so I had voices. I had a voice of Marlene Pinnock, who was a victim of police brutality in Los Angeles. And she's one of the victims who lived to talk about it. So she had an interview she did on TV, and I was able to use her voice in the piece, just describing what she felt. And also, while I was writing the piece, Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. And I had the voices of people protesting, once again, not from social media, but from YouTube, and just using technology to see what was going on. And actually some protests that I went to in Oakland, but just these protests that people were saying, I was able to include those in the piece as well. And from there, I was asked by the Dream Unfinished and Activist Orchestra to write a piece dedicated to Sandra Bland, who was a victim of police brutality. She was found dead in a jail cell in Texas, and the details of what happened to her remain a mystery to this day, but we know that had she not been arrested for a minor traffic violation, she would likely be alive today. So I did a collaboration with poet Sharon Strange and vocalist Helga Davis, and wrote a piece for orchestra and chorus, and Helga Davis dedicated to Sandra Bland. And this piece is called Yet Unheard. So this is a quote that's going on right now. A lot of people are thinking about a quote by Martin Luther King, and sorry if I misquote it, but it's about a riot is a language of the unheard. And so Sharon drew that title, Yet Unheard, from that quote of Martin Luther King. And so I've had these pieces, and Spirits is a piece that I perform piano, that just the way that Billie Holiday used to include the piece Strange Fruit in her concerts, she would include this piece that was about the lynching that was going on during her time. And so I include this piece in my concerts where I read the names of different victims of police brutality at the end. And unfortunately, each time I've performed it, there's been more names to add. So I just do a mix of names between women, men, children, and cis and queer and trans, and just try to include like a lot of these Black lives that are lost to situations of police brutality. So it's a topic that I'm very means a lot to me. And so what's going on right now, of course, is very disturbing. Just the fact that that we're still trying to get through this. But like I said, it's very encouraging how people are really standing up for themselves and really standing up for one another right now.
Can you repeat for us the name of this piece and tell us whether we can find it anywhere?
Oh, sure. So I'm gonna get more stuff directly on my website, but also on YouTube, there are several videos of Yet Unheard. It's a piece that we've done a number of times. We have a full version with orchestra and chorus, full orchestra, and we have a version with chamber orchestra and chorus. Each time it's with Helga Davis as the soloist. So there's a number of versions on YouTube. I'm gonna put them on my website, which is CourtneyBryan.com. Sanctum is on my website. My website directs to my SoundCloud, where I have a lot of my compositions that I've written in the past number of years. And Spirits as well as on YouTube, a performance that I did in New Orleans at the New Orleans Jazz Museum.
So as you know, that once I become a fan of a composer, I really stick to that composer. You can rest assured that I'm going to program these pieces wherever I can. So I'll be checking them out. Now, Amelia, what would you like to share with us, both about these recent events and about our efforts in the orchestra searching for diversity?
Well, it's been a really uncomfortable few weeks, and I think I've had to process the discomfort, and a lot of other white Americans have, in a way that we haven't had to before. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and swallow it and help. It's terrible, and it's really uncomfortable, and And I think it makes a lot of people scared also to speak up. There's a lot of pitfalls that people are worried about falling into. Courtney, if you ever want to jump in and correct me on anything I'm saying, absolutely welcome to. But I think we have to get past the fear and the discomfort of it not being our issue and get into it with the attitude of a support system. So we need to let people of color lead what they should be leading, or in any situation, especially something that is really relevant to them. And we should be there as support and backup to also help other white people understand what's happening, because people of color have been doing this work for generations to try to explain and tell us. And a lot of us have heard it. A lot of us are very well-intentioned. I'm speaking for myself here. I've heard about it. I have great intentions, and I have not done anything about it. I joined the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. But these events have also made me realize what a very small start that was. And I think the start is very important. This is a starting place. These few weeks for a lot of white Americans. And I think the start is so important. And then to not back away and not be scared and go in open-minded, that you might make a mistake, you might say the wrong thing, but to listen. We really, really, really have to listen. And it's interesting being a musician. There's a lot of analogies running through my head these days about practicing, what it means to practice. When we're practicing our instruments, it's self-examination. It's breaking things down. Like, why is this a problem? You don't just walk away and say, oh, whatever. Or if you're teaching, you don't tell a 5-year-old, oh, you can't play the instrument, just give up, just don't get it. You have to really pick one thing to fix. And this is sort of a loose train of thought here, but this is my feeling. I think we need to be here to listen, and we need to be here to help, and we need to be here to educate each other, because a lot of the people who've been doing this work are tired. And that's what I'm here for.
One thing which at the Louisiana Philharmonic, we've always talked about as a very big challenge is how do we really become more diverse, and how do we really reach out to a more diverse audience? And when I mean about a more diverse audience, I don't mean necessarily racially more diverse. You can talk about a more diverse audience within a certain race, because we are not being diverse even with our white audience. There is a problem of perception that we face in American orchestras, that what we play is for the cultured few, or for the rich few, or for the people who inherited that tradition from Europe or whatever. So I'd like to ask Courtney, since you are such an accomplished pianist, composer, to talk about this, because undoubtedly, whether we admit it or not, in a symphony orchestra, we are pegged as elitist and as in a corner of society that is exclusive rather than inclusive. Having said that, I have to say that most orchestras that I've ever been a guest with are obsessed about reaching out and are obsessed about becoming more diverse and more inclusive. So these two forces, for me, have been a constant source of conflict in my mind, because there is this very, very ingrained perception. I would even say that the perception is more than one. I think it's three. I think it's a social, I think it's a financial, and also it's an educational. So people think that what we do is expensive, what we do is for the highly educated, and what we do is only for a certain part of society, when nobody in an orchestra ever thinks like that. But yet we have not been successful in New Orleans, in the LPO, in really reaching out. So I'd like to ask Courtney to address these forces, these two ideas of the perception maybe of classical music as an art form, and this never ending and such difficult search for diversity.
Yeah, so speaking of listening, what I'm finding is that because my work, so growing up, I always played, I was always a pianist. And so I played in the classical world as well as the jazz world, and I also played in churches. I was very much in the classical world as a pianist, but my introduction to the orchestra world actually came later through being a composer. I always have been drawn to orchestral music, but as I've been writing orchestra music, I've been more involved in the world, and it is its own world, I realize, the orchestra world. So as far as listening, I find that I have to understand more about how things work institutionally, though that's not where I'm coming from. So I'm coming at it as an artist, and you know, as an artist, as a composer, and a performer, but I am interested in the institutional side and how things can become more open and become more accessible. And so just, I want to say all that to say I'm not an expert on answering this question, but I do care about it. So I think, while I think individual musicians don't tend to feel this way, as far as don't want their music to be seen as elitist and not open to everyone, I think there are, throughout my studies, that has been something that's been emphasized. There has been this idea that the classical music of Europe is somewhere above all other musics. And so just the way that curriculum, say, a curriculum in a school is constructed, you'll have to learn, it'll say, here's the priority, you have to learn about these composers first, and then we'll squeeze in all the other. So all the other might be everything else from around the world. And just the idea that every part of the world has its own classical musics is something that gets muddled into everything else. So it's like, maybe you have classical, maybe you have popular music, maybe you have folk, and maybe the classical music at one time was the popular music, and now we see it as classical. So all those titles get very confusing. But I think along the way that school programs are designed, the way that even things are advertised, there is a preference and priority for dead white male composers from Europe. Like, that's kind of like the big space. And then there's like a little space for everything else, maybe for living white male composers. And then where do you fit in women? And then where do you fit in Black people? Where do you fit in Hispanic people and Asian people? So there's all of that that's there that we're working against. So I don't exactly know what the answer is once you have an institution like an orchestra, how to change all of that without changing all of it. I mean, but I think that one thing I've always enjoyed about going to the LPO's concerts is I do hear a variety of programming. And I think that's important. And I've, like, I remember going to a concert where it was William Grant Still's Afro-American Symphony. And I can't remember if it was the same concert, but there was spirituals, and there's always a mix. But I think the programming is key to have. There's so many Black composers in this tradition, in fact, and they're usually under programmed. So William Grant Still may be one of the better known of Black composers of orchestral music, but he's still not programmed maybe as much as Aaron Copland. But there's also all the living composers. and I'm speaking on Black composers, there's also just composers of different demographics that are underrepresented. So I think, and there have been people doing work in this area, which is also another positive thing. And I'm hoping I'm getting the title right. I know the composer Rob Deemer and others have started this Institute for Composer Diversity. And I hope I got the title in the right order. But basically they started this database where you can search. It makes it easy for institutions actually to search by gender and by race and by instrumentation and by a number of different things, where you can actually go in there and find like, okay, I have something for orchestra, or I have something for chorus, or it could be solo bassoon music or solo viola. And then you can actually find all of this database of living composers of a wide variety who are doing the work. So I think that kind of work's been very important, because I find that institutions want to be more diverse, but sometimes they're thinking, where do I start? And where do I find all this information? So the information is there, the people are there, and the institutions want to be more diverse. So it's really about bringing all of that together. And accessibility, I think the money thing is always an issue. So I think that accessibility is an issue with a lot of things. If things cost a lot, then that kind of, then that already is an accessibility thing. So I think as institutions maybe find ways to deal with the economic costs of certain kind of concerts. And also something that I like about the LPO is how you bring concerts different places. So sometimes it's at the Orpheum Hall downtown, in that beautiful hall. I just love going in there. But sometimes it's at the hall downtown, but sometimes you bring it to Covington. Sometimes you do things in City Park. And so I think the more things can be brought, whether it's the whole orchestra or parts of the orchestra can be brought different places, I think then it just becomes more and more for everybody. So those are some of my thoughts as a composer, and I want to learn more about what is most effective.
I share your ideas and your conviction in this sense. I have to say that it is much easier for me in Mexico to reach a more diverse audience than in the US, because of one very simple but kind of essential reason. The orchestras in Mexico, most of them are 100% state supported, government funded. The price of a ticket in Bellas Artes, which is a beautiful Art Deco, Art Nouveau hall, 90 years old, and really just, with Tiffany glass all around it, it's breathtaking. But the most expensive seat there in a concert of the National Symphony is about $10 or $11. And the average seat is probably $3 to $4. Now, you have to factor in different living conditions, etc. But still, it is not impossible for a family to attend a Sunday matinee, especially because about half of the tickets have some kind of discount if you are over a certain age, or if you are under a certain age, or if you're a teacher, or if you're a student. So the government support that exists in some places in Latin America, and that I'm very often asked about, make it very easy for me to program things that are completely new, to come up with programs that any U.S. orchestra would look at me as if I have lost my mind, because our budget is not related to ticket sales. Now, we are not the only country like this. There are other countries like this in Europe. But I have to say that in one of the difficult forces, and one where I have been obsessed over the last years, and especially over the last months, how to break this vicious circle, which is the fact that we have to sell tickets in order to survive, and we have to attract an audience in order to survive, and that there is the perception that what attracts an audience is a certain repertoire that we perhaps have limited ourselves to. So one of the very big challenges at the Louisiana Philharmonic, even though I do admit there is quite a interesting and diverse and bold programming, but the reality of our finances and of the way the orchestras are funded today make it very hard for an orchestra to be always moving, so itinerant, because whenever we move, it costs money, or to do works of living composers, or to do commissions, or to do music of composers from other countries, because everything costs more than Mozart. And I'm not bad-mouthing Mozart, not at all. But Mozart, for people who don't understand what I'm talking about, is public domain. You can play it without paying any kind of fee to pay for it, while programming the music of a Panamanian composer like Roque Cordero, who is fantastic, costs a lot of money. So these financial issues are probably something that Amelia, you faced in this task force. And if not, please tell us some of these challenges and share with us some of these difficulties.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. The Diversity and Inclusion Task Force started in 2017, and actually, and Dwight McGee, who's now our board president, was always a co-chair. Chris Pell actually started as the musician co-chair, and in that time he moved on to Cincinnati. So I stepped in the following year. But it wasn't only about race, it was for disability and socioeconomic differences and all these other things you're talking about. And we definitely discussed these financial barriers. There is an orchestra in Oakland at some point. They started offering, they somehow connected discounted tickets to government assistance. People who were on government assistance could qualify through that program to discounted tickets. And people have tried to figure this out, and it's a puzzle in the US because of the funding setup that you've been talking about. And so the task force, basically there were 4 groups and areas that we were trying to address. So it was musicians, the people on stage, the administration, the trustees, and the audience. So you're looking at diversity in all these different aspects. So that kind of is the audience part of it, what you've been talking about. And when I joined, there had been a lot of very specific goals set. They'd had their big ideas in their formation, and then I joined into these very specific things that we addressed. So we addressed audition postings. Like, for example, if you post in the union, only people who are members of the union can see it, and that costs money. So you have students who maybe can't afford to be in the union or have no other reason to be in the union yet, and all these other things. So this is the most sort of musician relevant thing I'm thinking of right now. We looked at posting on Musical Chairs, which is a free site. So that was one example. The big iceberg that we don't see the rest of when we're talking about diversity on stage is music education, which is really hard. As an orchestra, it's a specialized field. We have a great education program within the LPO in a different way. We reach a lot of students. We reach a very diverse group of students, but not the big education concerts we do are for kids on field trips. They're not private lessons. We do have programs with other organizations connected to the LPO where LPO musicians do go into schools and work with kids. And in New Orleans, around New Orleans, the student population is incredibly diverse. And I think that is a really positive thing that is happening already, that we are reaching a really diverse group of students in all kinds of schools. Not only in New Orleans, we go, all over the place. We go to Ponchatoula, Slidell, Covington, and Destrehan, all these other areas around. So there's that. But when you're talking about accessibility, it comes from the performing side too. So what it takes to be an orchestral musician is private lessons, and that requires a certain amount of money, a certain setup at home that you can practice. You have your own space. Instruments are incredibly expensive. You have to have a parent who has the time and ability to get you to lessons and back. So there's all these things that a lot of people don't have access to, which happens because economic disparities mostly affect people of color. It's this sort of ripple effect. But the Sphinx organization has been around for a while now, which gives support to Black and Latina students to try to make up for this gap. And we partnered with them in the National Alliance for Audition Support, to try to give financial assistance for people of color to take auditions, which is its own very expensive thing. I don't know if everybody who's watching this knows, but when a position's open in an orchestra, it's one position usually. They post the audition and you have to get yourself there. You have to pay for your flight, you have to pay for your lodging, and you may have to be in a major city for sometimes 4 days. So even just that is incredibly expensive. So it's big. I think it's really valuable that this task force was created. It was created by the board, which is made up of community members and musicians. It's diversity and inclusion. So diversity is a given. We have to include, we have to find ways. And I will be the first to say that we didn't get very far, and it's hard work. And I think we have a lot more work to do. But I think it's also a lot of the things we're trying to tackle are very slow moving forces.
And I think that I am always so motivated in New Orleans when I see so many little kids playing music. And this is something that got me hooked in New Orleans since I started, because it just feels to me like there is a natural connection between just everyone and music. So maybe the barrier that has to be broken is between the perception of whatever types of music. And I always think of Duke Ellington, because Duke Ellington used to say, whenever they would ask him what he thought of classical music versus jazz or versus popular music, and he always answered the following. He says, there's just two kinds of music. There's good music and everything else, meaning good or bad music has nothing to do with whether it's classical, popular, or whatever kind of limits we put that are completely not real. I'd like to invite people to participate by asking questions. I have already a couple here, one by Bob Gross. Hello, Bob. It seems to me, this is Bob asking or saying, that the younger the person, when exposed to diverse orchestral repertoire, the easier it will be him or her to relate to the art form. Of course, I think that as parents or as teachers or as educators, we have to expose kids to as much diversity and not put limitations in their mind. I will tell you a story that happened to me within the first week that I was actively music director of the LPO. I signed my contract exactly 8 days before Hurricane Katrina. I was in South Korea, and I never, of course, never hesitated to sign on and to make this, one of my life tasks. And my first concert was not in September as the normal season, but it was in April because of Katrina. And in April, there was a very beautiful reception in New Orleans, uptown, in a very nice house. And I was introduced to a gentleman, and that gentleman approached me and said, I was very interested in reading in the newspaper today about the story of your family. And there was a story about my family, because my family has always been in chamber music, and especially in string chamber music and string quartet for 5 generations. And there was a story in the newspaper about that. And he said, my family kind of has something like that going on. And I said, great, well, can you tell me about it? And he said, well, yes, one of my sons is a trumpet player. One of my sons is a saxophone player. And by that point, I was like knowing who I was talking to. And it was Ellis Marsalis. So, of course, I should have known Ellis Marsalis. And ever since, I, of course, have followed him, and I was heartbroken with losing him a few months ago. But such a humble and such a human soul coming to me, and I just felt like saying, excuse me, sir, but your family is 10 times more and 10 times. And there I understood something that's very, very interesting, is that music is part of the fabric of the city of New Orleans. So my question to you, Courtney, is how can we make classical music as much part of the fabric as some other kind of music is already in the streets, already in the funerals, already in the celebrations? How can we make as many kids in New Orleans play viola as kids play trumpet or clarinet?
So the short answer is I can't answer that question. But the longer answer is I think it's, I appreciate you mentioning Ellis Marsalis, who was one of my teachers. And one thing about New Orleans, we have so many rich musical traditions. And so there's that. So there's all the musical families, and I'm not going to name all of them, but there's there's the Marsalis family for one, there's the Jordan family, there's the Baptiste family, the Chatters family, the Andrews family, and I'm just naming some of them, but there's all these families of musicians that go like generations back, and they have their own legacies. And that's then you have like the music of, say, the Black Indians and the traditions of that, which goes back generations and goes through families. And the brass band tradition, the different church traditions, gospel music traditions. There's marching band. And then there's always been the orchestral and opera traditions that go way back. So I don't know how one becomes, I just think they're all existing at one time. And what does stand out to me about New Orleans musicians is how we're encouraged to do it all. Even if one person is known as this, one person might be known for doing a certain style, but they usually do many styles. It's about, it's about learning the instrument, just being exposed. People are exposed to a lot. They do a lot. They're known for certain things, but also, I don't know. It's just such a rich. New Orleans is its own case. It's just a beautiful place. Like as far as music, so I don't know. I mean, I think with the different instruments, I mean, I think it just goes back to accessibility thing. I don't think that. I think that I'll just say in school there should be more emphasis. People learn all these styles, but it'd be nice if in school everything was kind of equally presented, maybe, and maybe not. Maybe that's difficult for teachers to be able to teach every type of music, but I think like what I was mentioning earlier, how you kind of in certain schools you have to like prioritize first Bach and Beethoven and Brahms. I know you listen to these and Mozart, and there's that, and they're like, okay, and then they try to separate these things like jazz and classical, but in reality, like musicians are just, or a lot of people think more of the way Duke Ellington spoke about it, where they're drawn to a lot of different things and they do a lot of different things, but we get kind of like, I don't know if it's the music business or what it is. There's definitely race involved in it, but there's this thing where we get separated into these different categories. So I think the orchestra, I think everybody, whatever it is people do, they should do that thing well and just make it accessible. And I think that that's what, I mean, the LPO, people love going to hear the LPO. And so if it's just a matter of, anyway, I think we all have these different worlds that coexist together and they're all beautiful. And so I think we need to keep doing that. And it's just a matter of how things can be accessible and how kids can have access to instruments, period. I mean, that's a big thing. It's a major thing in New Orleans that we're a culture that still plays live instruments, and it's cool to play live instruments. So I think the more that continues and that the schools, I'm hoping that the school system's different than when I grew up. I grew up in the public school system, in Orleans Parish School Board system, and we have these charter schools now. So I don't really understand how it all works, but I know it's a different system than we had before. So when I grew up, you just happen to go to a school and you study with this really profound musician who decided that they were going to teach full time. And then like they've had all these experiences playing around the world, and it's just like we just grew up and just had that, in the public school. So so I have more questions and answers, but I just say that all of these traditions are equally rich, and it's a beautiful thing if we can all learn from each other.
One thing which is perhaps not known to everyone who may be watching is the fact that the LPO is a 67 musician orchestra, where I would say that a big percentage of the musicians are actually teachers. And I've witnessed this directly with my kids being students of musicians from the LPO. So the Louisiana Philharmonic does not only participate in the music life of New Orleans, playing classical concerts or playing educational concerts or young people's concerts in big numbers, but is represented in each one of the musicians who has a big number of students. So the trickle down effect of the orchestra is actually very, very large and very, very important. And I always say is one more reason to support the orchestra, because otherwise it would be hard to find the amount and the quality of teachers. In your case, Amelia, do you have students?
Yeah, I have some private students, and I've been working at the Homer Plessy Community School for years through a Jazz and Heritage grant. And so I've had the experience of I'm not the lead teacher there. I go and help to try to get private lessons to kids that would normally only have a large class format. But yeah, I think it's it's going to be a generational change. I think we do have to focus on education, and just my own personal thoughts. I think, well, we've discussed these things in the task force also, but visibility is really important. It makes a big difference. When we had a Sheku,
Connie Mason.
Oh yeah.
Played so many, it was 3 concerts, I think. And it was as full as it's ever been. It was a genuinely racially diverse audience, and it felt so good. And I think that, you know, like Courtney was saying, classical music has historically been a white space. And I think one of the things that we could work on at a faster pace is communicating that it doesn't have to be a white space, that everybody's welcome, everybody belongs there, and nobody should feel like they don't belong in this world, in this space.
And to echo what you are saying, because I was actually one of the first people who ever accompanied Sheku, and that week was his US debut, by the way. But I met Sheku in the UK because he was the soloist of the National Youth Orchestra from Great Britain in a tour that I did. And I met Sheku, and I met his whole family. And if you think Sheku is talented, which he's supremely talented, his sisters are just as talented. And look out for the other Connie Masons, because they are an amazing group of kids. And he is actually a sophomore, so second year student at the Royal Academy, and his teacher greatly limits his playing as far as concerts and repertoire and his own humble nature. But I think you will agree with me that he was one of the most convincing soloists that we ever have had, who actually played in 2 of the 3 concerts different arrangements of his songs of Bob Marley, who is, by the way, my son's musical idol, because we went to Jamaica. I toured Jamaica with the Orchestra of the Americas in the most amazing tour that included Haiti, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and these beautiful places that are as musical as can be. And Jamaica just stood out because of Bob Marley and because of the incredible musicality of its people. And for me, New Orleans is an equivalent to that. So it's the everything is there. The talent is there. And I've always said, when people ask me about music education, about kids, I always say that the talent is much bigger than our ability to shape it. But my obsession now, and it's been that for about 4 weeks, and it's been now re-emphasized by these sad events of the last days, is that in the new post-pandemic world, we will have to find a way to include into our mission and to include into the way that we fund ourselves, and to find partners that are obsessed with 2 things: just sheer generosity and inclusiveness or inclusivity. I don't know what's the right word there, but the fact that we have to fundraise, I want to find partners who just want to fund generous things from the orchestra, and things that allow us to go to every single community. Because sometimes, in order to be inclusive, one has to go places. I give you as an example, the one time that we had the visit of a mariachi group that I invited. And I mean, I grew up with mariachi music, and I'm from Mexico, and Mexican music is part of my love. And I decided that it would be cool to have a mariachi group play with the orchestra. And we did have one, and we did have a very good one and a very famous one. And we decided to play at the convention center. Were you already there at the orchestra? I believe we did. We played at the convention center. And I've never seen more Latin American people in the audience as in that concert. And I'm sure that if we would have had that concert at the Orpheum, there would have been all kinds of problems and all kinds of difficulties. But there were two things that allowed us to be successful in that concert. One was the way we publicized it, which was very much directed at the Latin American community, which is very important in New Orleans. And also the fact that we made it financially accessible and at a place that was easily reachable and people knew. So there is no doubt that there is a difficulty, perhaps not so much in New Orleans, but in cities like Houston, for example, where most of the Latin community lives on the outskirts of Houston. It's very hard to get people to come downtown to Jones Hall for a concert that may be of Mexican music. I found that out the hard way by having the first one not be successful and then change the model. So we have to have partners that help us fund things for reasons that are different than social reasons, for things that are different than tax reasons, or for things that are actually completely way beyond how we think. In a symposium that I was invited to about a week and a half ago, where I was asked to represent the rest of the world, which was the weirdest thing, because there was somebody representing the US, which was Deborah Rutter from the Kennedy Center, somebody representing Europe, somebody representing Asia. I was representing, imagine that, the rest of the world. I only spoke about Mexico. I said that music in Mexico could simply not exist without a combination of state support or partners who are only worried about education and about social issues. If this was already a necessity, it's now going to be a doubly clear necessity. We cannot go on playing for our very loyal, beautiful audience without trying and finding partners that help us reach out. And sorry for this monologue, but it's been it's been for me such an obsession that I just wanted to share it here. Imani Owen says equally presented and equally valued. Yes, how you present something is also something very, very important. Now I'd like to ask you, I mean, we've already gone over time, but I think we're touching upon important things. So Courtney, would you like to add anything to what's been said?
Well, yes, I like what you're saying about things that are state sponsored or like the government supporting the arts, because I think this time right now is a very vulnerable time. As we started off talking about, it's a vulnerable time that can go in any number of directions. But I think what we're seeing with the people protesting and speaking out is that, first of all, there's been a lot of organization about a lot of things that need to change. And I think it's a time for artists as well and institutions to maybe dream about what we need. So it's like we deal with what we have and we try to work within that. But I do want to use this time personally to dream about what could be possible, and just imagining if we did have more even more government support of the arts. Even in our city of New Orleans, if musicians were paid better, I mean, just basic things, like if they were less dependent, if musicians were less dependent on tips for their pay, and if there were like certain minimums. So I just want to mention in general, it's a time for dreaming about things to be differently, and then also pushing for those things to change, as far as support.
I just got an email from Kara. Do you know Kara?
Yes.
Okay, so Kara, I'm not sure she's still connected, but Kara has been my daughter's piano teacher, and she's married to Vance Wolf, who was our principal trumpet, who's a fabulous trumpet player from New Zealand. And Kara sends the following message: Courtney is a gem. Oh. She was a piano student of our longtime executive and artistic director, Daniel Weilbecher. Did I pronounce that correct?
That's right.
And a student in our piano institute. She's also now on our board. I launched a little virtual mini concert series called Mass Notes on April 28th in an effort to stay connected to our community while continuing to support our artists. Courtney was featured artist in the second episode feature, and it was Spirit. Her work she referenced in her interview, and she sends me the link to that.
Okay, great.
And then she says it's chilling to hear her names and knowing so many more who could be added to that list. So I just wanted to share with you this message, because it kind of ties everything together. Kara is not officially part of the orchestra, but she is as close to the LPO as she can be. And she is the head of MASNO, which is a very important musical institution in New Orleans. And so we started talking about something very sad and something very difficult to comprehend. And we've migrated into something hopeful, which is music education. And so as we get close to wrapping this conversation up, I would like to say that just like poetry or just communication is a way out of trouble, and is a way to understand each other, so is music. And music is a vehicle that is as potent as any to understand each other. I've lived through this for 20 years with the Orchestra of the Americas, which is the most diverse orchestra that I've ever worked with. It's a summer orchestra comprised of 100 musicians between Canada and Chile, which includes 5 different languages and all kinds of different backgrounds, races, beliefs, religions, and traditions. And within that effort, I have become a better person, a better musician, and I have learned from people who express themselves in a different way, from Brazilians, from Venezuelans, from Canadians, from Jamaicans. And there is absolutely no reason for us to put borders in music, because music has absolutely no borders. Of course, that borders are something that are very present in the mind of anybody from my country. And I cannot ignore the fact that only 1 or 2 years ago, we started something very, very, very hurtful in Mexico, which is realizing what was happening to little children in the border of the United States. And I'm not talking about this politically. I don't go into politics. I just say that is so incredibly incomprehensible for me as anything else that's happened. So at the same time, I am hopeful that young people see this as a way to communicate more than ever now. And maybe it is my perception, but it seems to be that most of these marches are actually very diverse and include people of all ages and people of all races. That's the impression that we get here in Mexico. Okay, if that's true or not, I don't know. But if that's true, that's another reason of hope. And I'll share with you my third thing, which moved me to tears. And again, please excuse my ignorance if this is ignorant, but I saw that a certain police force decided to react to one of these marches by kneeling and hugging some of the people who were marching. I found that to be a beautiful thing. Okay, now please excuse me if I'm not reading it right, but those three things give me hope in the future, while acknowledging the tremendously difficult situation. Am I reading some of these things wrong? And if you've been, I don't know if you've been watching the news, but am I getting a wrong impression?
I don't know. I feel like a lot of people could speak on it better than me, but I mean, it is good when you see those situations of police doing the right thing, and we're seeing a lot right now. I mean, we see a lot of the police doing the wrong thing, and they're militarized. It's like, why do police units have military? Why is it like a military against the civilians? But then you do see people who are handling things in a better way. So I mean, the idea. I mean, when we come to dreaming, it's like, can we have a way to have policing be more humane? But that's all I will say about it.
Amelia, have you been following the news? And am I getting a wrong vibe from some of this?
I'm also not the best person, but there's a lot of skepticism about police kneeling. I'm sure it's genuinely a great thing. I know that there was a very beautiful, peaceful night in New Orleans 2 or 3 nights ago. And then I think last night they tear gassed the protesters. So there's some positive. It's hard to tell exactly if it's how deep it goes.
Right. Well, I mean, I ask you because I'm one of these people who always tries to see in what way we can learn, and in what way we can move forward. And I think as an orchestra, going back to the LPO, I think that reaching out as we have to people who have something as deep to say as Courtney is the right way. And it is not because of Courtney being a representative of anything, is just because of her incredible talent. And Courtney, I think that you are going to be a very important ally of ours over the next years, not only because you're a sensational composer, but because you know so much about so many things, about so many musicians. And I mean, I told you this a few months ago. We actually have, as part of our season, and hopefully we will be able to do it, your violin concerto. But I want to talk to you about how we can partner with you in the future in a more significant way. And if that means the LPO, if that means me, that means me. And because I think that you are an essential voice, and you are also somebody who is so spiritual. Just hearing that video that Kara sent me, and that I had watched right before this, made me very emotional. And I even thought that maybe asking you to write a piece about all that's happening would be a way. So maybe you can think about that. I'm not like publicly committing, forcing you to do anything, but just like to say that would be a dream of mine.
Thank you.
Can I add one really quick thing that?
Yes.
And this is not a result of the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, but we're all so excited to have Maestro Thomas Wilkins as principal guest conductor with us. That was as unanimous as I've ever seen musicians get. We're so excited to have him come, and we're so excited to play with him. And I'm excited for what he represents to students of color and audience members of color who see him and feel hopefully more welcome in our space. And he's just a brilliant conductor.
And a great colleague and a great musician. I've had contact with him and I share your enthusiasm. So now I have to wrap this up. And I'd like to ask both of you to have, right before I say goodbye, to have your last comments, and I'll ask Amelia to say whatever you want to say goodbye.
We just have to be open-minded and listen and be aware that the way we see the world may be very different than the way somebody else with a different life experience sees the world. And I think if we can go in to any conversation with that mentality and stay humble and listen, not just listen, but hear, I think we can make genuine progress.
And now, Courtney.
And I'll just say 3 things to everyone out there. Take care of yourself. Let's take care of each other, and Black Lives Matter.
Thank you very, very much to both of you. And thank you to everyone who participated. I really think we touched upon some very difficult topics, some topics that one simply cannot not touch. And it's very, very important that we keep this conversation going and that we keep this relationship with you, Courtney, going.
Yeah,
so
looking forward.
I send all my regards to everyone in the LPO family, to everyone in the LP in New Orleans, and I'm just dying to be there. Hopefully, if I can make it in August, I'm actually in Mexico. I'll be there, and we're going to have some sort of season, and it's going to be tremendously exciting, and it will include something by this amazing lady, and hopefully it's going to be her violin concerto. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To everyone, see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.